Have you ever reached a point where someone who once had immense power over your emotions suddenly doesn't anymore, not because they apologized, not because they changed, but because something inside you shifted quietly and permanently? That moment is often misunderstood because we are taught that winning means confrontation or closure. But when it comes to narcissistic dynamics, real victory looks very different. It is subtle, internal, and deeply unsettling to the person who once thrived on your reactions. Today, we are talking about the signs that appear not when a narcissist thinks they are winning, but when they know they are losing, not through words or fights, but through your emotional independence and self control. If you have ever felt drained, confused, or trapped in a cycle where your peace depended on someone else's behavior, this conversation will help you recognize what happens when that cycle finally breaks and why the narcissist almost always reveals it. Because defeating a narcissist for real is not loud, dramatic, or obvious. It is quiet, powerful, and life-changing. When you defeat a narcissist, for real, the first and most revealing sign is a sudden spike in emotional reactivity from them. And this reaction is not subtle. It shows up as agitation, irritability, anxiety, or impulsive behavior because narcissists are deeply invested in controlling emotional outcomes. They regulate their sense of power by provoking responses such as fear, guilt, anger, or admiration. And when those reactions disappear, it destabilizes them at a core level. Your calm neutrality or emotional distance creates an internal alarm because it signals that their influence is no longer working. This loss of control feels threatening to their identity, not just the relationship. A narcissist is not reacting to losing you as a person. They are reacting to losing access to your emotional energy when they notice that their usual tactics no longer trigger you. They may increase the intensity of their behavior, becoming louder, more dramatic, or more unpredictable. This can look like sudden anger, passive-aggressive remarks, excessive messaging, or attempts to pull you into arguments that previously worked. These reactions are not strength, they are dysregulation. What makes this sign so important is that it happens without you doing anything different on the surface. You may simply be quieter, more detached, or less reactive. And yet the narcissist senses the shift immediately because their internal radar is tuned to emotional feedback. They notice that you are no longer feeding the dynamic and that absence feels intolerable to them. This heightened reactivity often comes with urgency. They may demand answers, push for conversations, or accuse you of changing or becoming cold because they feel the ground slipping beneath them. They are trying to restore the familiar power imbalance where they felt superior and secure, and your lack of emotional engagement disrupts that structure. In many cases, this reactivity also includes projection. They may accuse you of being manipulative, selfish, or emotionally unavailable, when in reality they are describing their own internal experience. This projection is a defense against shame because acknowledging that they no longer affect you would require self-awareness, and narcissistic personalities avoid that at all costs. It is crucial to understand that this reaction is not a sign that you should explain yourself, reassure them, or try to fix the tension. Doing so would reactivate the old pattern and restore their sense of control. The discomfort they are experiencing is the natural consequence of losing emotional leverage. Your nervous system has shifted out of survival mode while theirs is flaring because the dynamic has changed. The power was never in confrontation or dominance, it was in your emotional availability. And once that is gone, the narcissist reacts because their usual tools no longer function and they are left facing the emptiness they worked so hard to avoid. The second sign a narcissist shows when you have defeated them for real is their deep disturbance in response to your silence and indifference, because for a narcissist, attention is oxygen and emotional engagement is proof of relevance. They are not fueled only by admiration, but by any strong reaction, whether it is love, anger, fear, or sadness. When you stop reacting altogether, it creates a psychological void that they are unequipped to tolerate. Silence is not something a narcissist interprets as peace. They experience it as rejection, erasure, and loss of dominance. When you no longer explain, defend, argue, or emotionally respond, they lose the ability to shape your reality, and this is profoundly destabilizing. Indifference communicates something confrontation never could, that they no longer matter enough to provoke a response. What makes silence so powerful is that it removes the narcissist from the center of the emotional universe. They depend on being the focal point of every interaction, and when you disengage, they feel invisible, and invisibility is one of their deepest fears because it mirrors the internal emptiness they spend their lives avoiding. In response to this indifference, narcissists often escalate attempts to regain attention. They may suddenly become charming, apologetic, or overly affectionate, or they may swing to the opposite extreme, becoming hostile, critical, or dramatic. Both reactions serve the same purpose: to extract an emotional response from you, because any reaction confirms they still exist in your emotional world. This phase often confuses people because the narcissist may appear more vulnerable or remorseful than ever before, but this is not insight or change. It is panic masquerading as softness. Their distress is not about hurting you, it is about losing access to the emotional supply that regulated their self-worth. Indifference also disrupts the narcissist's internal hierarchy, where they position themselves as superior or central. When you stop engaging, they are forced to confront the reality that they cannot control how you feel, and that loss of control feels humiliating even if they never admit it. It is important to understand that your silence is not cruelty. It is self-protection, and it is often the only boundary a narcissist truly understands. Explaining yourself prolongs the dynamic, but indifference ends it because there is nothing left to manipulate. When you maintain emotional neutrality, you are no longer participating in the narcissistic cycle. And this is why silence affects them so deeply. It signals that the relationship no longer defines you. And when that happens, the narcissist senses defeat, not through words, but through the absence of emotional access. The third sign a narcissist shows when you have defeated them for real is a sudden and dramatic shift into victimhood. Because once manipulation, intimidation, or charm no longer works, they change strategy and rewrite the narrative. This shift is not subtle. It often feels confusing because the person who once dominated the dynamic now presents themselves as wounded, misunderstood, or unfairly treated. And this transformation is designed to pull you back into emotional engagement. For a narcissist, control is maintained through narrative power. They need to define what happened, who was right and who was wrong. And when you emotionally detach, they lose that authority. Stepping into the role of the victim allows them to regain leverage by appealing to guilt, empathy, or social pressure, because if they can make you feel responsible for their pain, they can still influence your behavior. This victim posture often includes selective memory. They minimize their harmful actions, exaggerate your boundaries, and frame your self-protection as cruelty statements, like "I did everything for you" or "I don't know why you changed" are common. Because they are not seeking understanding, they are seeking absolution without accountability and attention without repair. What makes this sign particularly revealing is that it often extends beyond the private relationship. The narcissist may share their version of events with friends, family, or coworkers, positioning themselves as the abandoned or betrayed one. This is not vulnerability, it is image management. The goal is to recruit validation from others to replace the emotional supply they lost from you. Internally, this shift into victimhood protects them from shame, acknowledging that they lost you because of their behavior would require self-reflection, and narcissistic personalities avoid that at all costs. By portraying themselves as the injured party, they preserve their fragile self-image while still maintaining a sense of moral superiority. This phase can be emotionally exhausting for the person who has detached because it triggers the urge to explain, clarify, or defend yourself, especially if you are someone with empathy. But engaging only reactivates the dynamic because the narcissist is not operating in good faith. They are operating in survival mode. The key understanding here is that genuine victims seek healing, and insight narcissistic victimhood seeks attention and control. Their pain is real to them, but it is not rooted in accountability. It is rooted in entitlement to your emotional presence. When you refuse to step back into the role of caretaker or redeemer, the victim narrative collapses, and that collapse confirms the defeat, because they are forced to face the reality that their suffering no longer governs your choices, and your emotional independence breaks the final thread of influence they once held. The fourth sign a narcissist shows when you have defeated them for real is the emergence of a smear campaign, because when direct control fails, they shift to indirect methods to regain a sense of dominance. This behavior is not about truth or resolution. It is about restoring their wounded ego by shaping how others perceive you. Once they can no longer manage you emotionally, they attempt to manage your reputation. A narcissist experiences your emotional withdrawal as a public and private injury, and instead of processing that loss internally, they externalize it by creating a narrative in which you are the problem. This allows them to maintain a sense of superiority while avoiding accountability for their actions. The smear campaign becomes a defense against shame and an attempt to regain validation from others. This campaign may be subtle or overt. It can involve insinuations, half-truths, exaggerations, or outright lies, often delivered with calm concern or dramatic urgency. The goal is not consistency but impact. They are trying to provoke doubt, confusion, or judgment in others, while simultaneously baiting you into reacting because your response would give them renewed relevance. What makes this stage particularly painful is that it often targets your character rather than specific behaviors. They may accuse you of being unstable, ungrateful, manipulative, or cruel. These accusations are frequently projections reflecting traits they cannot tolerate in themselves. By assigning them to you, they offload their internal discomfort and preserve their self-image. The smear campaign also serves a secondary purpose. It recruits new sources of emotional supply, sympathy, attention, and alliance from people who accept their version of events. This external validation temporarily soothes the narcissist's internal emptiness and reinforces the belief that they are justified in their behavior. For the person who has detached, this phase can trigger a strong desire to defend your name, correct the story, or expose the truth. But engaging often deepens the damage because narcissists thrive on conflict and confusion. Responding publicly ties you back into the dynamic and reinforces their narrative that you are reactive or unstable. The most unsettling aspect of a smear campaign is that it reveals how transactional the relationship truly was. When admiration, compliance, or emotional access ended, your value in their eyes disappeared and was replaced by devaluation. This shift confirms that the bond was never based on mutual respect, but on control. When you choose not to participate in the narrative war, you quietly remove the narcissist's final tool of influence over you. Your integrity remains intact, while their story eventually collapses under its own contradictions, and the absence of your engagement becomes the clearest signal that their power over you is truly gone. The fifth sign a narcissist shows when you have defeated them for real is a noticeable escalation in their behavior when they sense that the loss of emotional supply is permanent. This escalation is not random, it is a last-ditch effort to restore a dynamic that once made them feel powerful, because narcissists do not let go easily when something threatens their source of validation. At this stage, the narcissist realizes on some level that the old tactics are no longer effective. Your boundaries are holding, your reactions are gone, and your emotional availability has closed. This awareness creates panic because without supply, their fragile sense of self begins to unravel. Escalation becomes a way to shock the system and force a response. This escalation can take many forms. It may appear as intensified love bombing, sudden apologies, promises of change, or dramatic declarations of insight. These behaviors can feel convincing because they are delivered with urgency, but they are not rooted in accountability. They are rooted in fear of abandonment and loss of control. In other cases, the escalation turns darker. The narcissist may become more aggressive, critical, or threatening. They might increase manipulation, use guilt, or attempt to provoke jealousy or fear. The underlying goal remains the same: to pull you back into emotional engagement, because even negative attention is preferable to none. What is important to understand is that this phase often occurs when the narcissist senses finality, when they realize that you are not just taking space, but actually moving on emotionally. This realization strikes at the core of their identity because it challenges the belief that they are indispensable or superior. Escalation also reflects entitlement. Narcissists believe they deserve access to you, and when that entitlement is blocked, they react with intensity rather than reflection. The idea that you can choose peace over them feels intolerable because it contradicts their internal hierarchy where they must always matter most. For the person who has detached, this stage can be unsettling because the behaviors may feel unpredictable or extreme, but it is essential to recognize escalation as confirmation rather than failure. It means your boundaries are working and the dynamic is collapsing. Engaging during this phase, whether to reassure, argue, or explain, can reignite the cycle and reset their hope that control is still possible. Holding steady is not cruelty, it is self-preservation. When escalation no longer produces a reaction, the narcissist is forced to confront a reality they have spent their life avoiding: that they cannot force connection, admiration, or relevance. And this moment of collapse marks the clearest evidence that the emotional hold they once had has finally ended. The sixth and most definitive sign a narcissist shows when you have defeated them for real is your inner calm, because while the previous signs focus on their reactions, this one is centered on your internal shift, and narcissists are acutely sensitive to that change. They may not fully understand it, but they feel it immediately because the emotional field between you has fundamentally changed. Your calm is not passive. It is regulated, grounded, and self-contained, and that is deeply unsettling to a narcissist because their influence depended on dysregulating you. They relied on your anxiety, hope, fear, or need for validation to feel powerful. When those emotional hooks disappear, they are left without leverage. This calm often shows up as clarity. You no longer ruminate over their words, replay conversations, or seek closure from them. You trust your own perception, and this self-trust removes the narcissist's ability to gaslight or distort reality. They can no longer destabilize you because your sense of self is no longer outsourced to their approval. From the narcissist's perspective, your calm feels like emotional exile. They may accuse you of being cold, detached, or uncaring because they cannot comprehend peace that does not involve them. They interpret your regulation as punishment because in their world, emotional distance equals rejection. What makes this sign so powerful is that it does not require explanation or confrontation. It is communicated through your presence, your tone, and your boundaries. The narcissist senses that you are no longer emotionally accessible, and that access is what once sustained the dynamic. This inner calm also signals a shift from survival mode to self-leadership. You are no longer reacting. You are choosing, and narcissists struggle with people who choose rather than comply because choice implies autonomy, and autonomy threatens their need for dominance. As your calm stabilizes, the narcissist may attempt subtle tests or provocations to see if they can still reach you. But when those attempts fail, they are forced to face an uncomfortable truth that they no longer matter in the way they once did. This realization is deeply wounding to their ego because it dismantles the illusion of control. Your calm does not humiliate them, your calm liberates you, and that liberation is what confirms the defeat, not because they lose, but because you win yourself back. When you no longer feel compelled to monitor their behavior, anticipate their moods, or manage their reactions, the emotional contract is broken, and in that quiet, grounded space, the narcissist's power dissolves without drama, without closure, and without your participation. When you look at all these signs together, a clear truth emerges. Defeating a narcissist is never about overpowering them, exposing them, or making them admit wrongdoing. It is about removing yourself from the emotional economy that once sustained the dynamic. Every reaction they show agitation, victimhood escalation, smear campaigns, and desperation is simply a response to losing access to your inner world. The real victory is quiet and internal. It is the moment you stop explaining, stop defending, stop waiting for validation, and start trusting your own clarity. The narcissist does not change, but the relationship does because you are no longer participating in it. When your nervous system settles, your boundaries hold, and your focus shifts back to your own life, the power imbalance dissolves. The narcissist senses the defeat not because you confronted them, but because they no longer matter enough to